And the analogy I want to give you is an analogy that I first heard it from Sid Banks, but the way I talk about it is a little bit different. And it's the analogy of going through life in a glass elevator. And we can imagine that the glass elevator is the elevator of consciousness. And when you're on the ground floor, all you can see is what's in front of you. Everything looks real. And sort of the ground floor of the elevator of consciousness is what we might call the idea of an objective reality. That the world is exactly what I see. That my mind is a camera, and what I see is exactly what's there. And thought doesn't enter into it. And that's a pretty scary world most of the time to inhabit. Not always, because sometimes what's right in front of you is something that seems lovely. But most of the time, it's a scary proposition. And if you get stuck at the bottom of the elevator of consciousness, where everything is real and everything is objective, your experience of life is probably pretty miserable. But most people don't get stuck there. Most people do gradually rise up, and they can see a little more, like you can in a glass elevator. You get up above a certain level and you get a little bit of perspective on things. And sort of the lower levels of the glass elevator of consciousness are what we might call a subjective reality. And a subjective reality is, well, the world is the way that I'm looking at the world. So like my perspective or point of view is what determines my experience. So there's still a world out there, and that's still determining my experience, but how I look at it matters. How I see it matters. And I begin to have some more choices. And I begin to realize, I can choose my attitude. I can choose the angle that I look at things from. And that gives me more freedom. And that gives me more possibility. It's still real, but I've got some choice now. But the elevator doesn't stop there. And when we get to the higher levels of consciousness, we start to experience the world not as objective or even subjective, but as constructed. So at this level, the mind stops being a camera, and we start to see it as a paintbrush. We start to see that we are the creators of our experience via thought, via consciousness, brought to life by mind. And suddenly we live in a much more fluid reality. Suddenly living the dream takes on a very different meaning, because we recognize that we're the dreamer. And that as our thinking changes, our experience will change. And the world, quite literally, is what we think it is. And we begin to experience life in a much more free way. Our relationship to life has changed. So we're no longer afraid of our experience, because we're the creators of our experience. And in the same way as if you drew a picture of a monster, it'd be very hard to then get scared of the picture. When you see that you're the one creating your reality, it's very hard to get too scared about the content of that reality. Now, the mystics tell us that even that is not the highest level of consciousness, that there are higher floors that we could call the floors of illusion, where we see that the world is neither objective nor subjective nor constructed, but entirely illusory. As I said earlier in the program, Sid Banks said, the world is a divine dream, suspended between the boundaries of space, time, and matter. And at this point, the mind, it's not a camera, it's not a paintbrush, it's a kaleidoscope. It's just something that takes in light and creates different images depending on what happens to, which thoughts happen to be in the way of that light. And it's ever changing. Or you could use the metaphor of the mind as a prism, where the pure light of consciousness shines through our thoughts and creates all the experiences of the rainbow in our life. And at that level, we're able, even for a moment, to see the truth of the human experience as it's been told by the mystics and sages throughout time, which is that we are one. We are one with the light, we are the light. We are one with love, we are love. We are one with the truth, we are truth. And you'll see that message echoed throughout every spiritual tradition in the world, and you see it reflected in the sciences of the world. One energy, one love, one thought.